So I wanted to talk about how to complete the stress response cycle. I left you all hanging several months ago because I I've been applying to grad school for counseling psychology programs because I was like, wow, look at what I'm doing in my spare time. I'm making videos about psychology, and I've always been really interested in psychology and always have overanalyzed everything. I thought, well, maybe that could come in handy for, like, maybe my overanalyzing could come in handy. And I'm always accurate. So I started the depression and the stress response cycle series, took a break, applied to grad school, and now I want to talk about how to complete the stress response cycle. So first I want to talk about the steps of the stress response cycle. First, you recognize a stressor. Second, you go into fight the whatever's stressing you out, or you flight, you run away from your stressor, or step 3, you freeze. And we've been talking about freeze. Freeze happens when someone believes consciously or unconsciously that they cannot win a fight, and when they believe that they cannot outrun it. So what happens in fight and flight that doesn't happen in freeze? Well, fight and flight have activity, they get their heart rate up, there's physical movement. There is also, so I've been referencing Emily Nagoski for you. She talks about one of the ways to complete the cycle is to have like something that creates deep breathing. So one of the most common ways that everyone knows about in relieving stress is exercise, right? We all know, everyone says that. I'm not telling you anything new. And yes, that's one of the things she talks about. That's one of the things I want to say is it's the most proven way to relieve stress. So the problem with talking about exercising to relieve stress, lowering cortisol levels, when you're talking about someone who's in freeze, is that freeze is associated with tonic immobility. So tonic immobility is when the body shuts down to facilitate a painless death. It is most commonly spoken about, one of the ways it's most commonly talked about is when we talk about rape victims who shut down, and when people ask them, when people interrogate them, unfortunately, and say, why didn't you try to stop it or something? And lots of times they feel ashamed, but there actually is a physiological response called tonic immobility. Look it up, which is associated with freeze, where the body shuts down. Depression over a long time looks like tonic immobility over a long time, right? Because when we talk about a depressed person, when we think about a really depressed person, lots of times depressed people, they can't get out of bed. When we talk about really depressed people, they don't get out of their house, okay? And I want to really not shame these people because it is a physiological response. Luckily, their exercise isn't the only way to lower cortisol levels. I want to talk about how to retrain your body to feel safe. I think that's the most important way to manage anxiety, depression, anger issues, is those things happen as a response to stress. So there are lots of different ways that you can complete the stress response cycle. One of the ways that I've interpreted all of it, how I've categorized all of the things that I have been reading, are that they are things that you do when you feel safe. When you feel threatened, you're not gonna be in a position where you'd be doing these things. So, except for the first one that I'm gonna mention, which is sleep. So sleep does go with tonic immobility, because freeze, lots of times depressed people, they just want to sleep all the time, or they have a really irregular sleep schedule. But sleep is one of the ways that we can retrain ourselves that we're safe. If you're not sleeping, you're going to feel more on edge. Another way is crying, releasing, right? You can't cry in front of your stressor unless it's like an adaptive thing, like, feel bad for me, don't hurt me. But crying, right, releasing, and Emily Nagoski does mention that crying shouldn't be like wallowing, right? Because rumination is associated with depression. People who just ruminate about something that's making them really upset. So crying, it should be more of like a release. Like, one of the things she talks about is that people who are stuck in step 2, the way to get through these things, to get through it, is to go through the emotion. So to feel the feelings completely, to let it all out. And I know with like toxic masculinity, that's really hard for the boys, so sorry. Another thing she says is primal screams. So if, you're fortunate enough to have a space where you can go where no one's going to hear you and you can just go scream, like, because that's what you would do if you were about to be attacked by a lion, right? Like, after, when the lion was gone, you might just be like, ah! Or you might scream to get help from the villagers. So it's a release, right? Screaming is a release. Or maybe you have really awesome roommates who, like, support you. Like, maybe you live with a bunch of hippie people and they're like, let it out, let it out. You should find some roommates like that. Which brings me to positive social interaction. So when we're feeling really threatened, one of the reasons we might feel threatened is if we don't feel safe in our peer group. So if you just have, one of the things she talks about is, like, it's hard with COVID now, but like going to the coffee shop and just having a light positive interaction, retraining yourself that people are nice, smiling at people. If you're in New York and you smile at someone, that might not work so good for you. They're gonna be like, what are you looking at? And affection. That's such a great way to complete the stress response cycle. So yeah, people tend not to be affectionate, like, when they're afraid that they're gonna, get eaten by something. Maybe they're like, oh, it's the end of the world, we have to, like, love each other. But I mean, yeah, you aren't affectionate if you're in a threatening environment. That's second priority. So affection, which goes hand in hand with body self-care, right? So affection is a way to, like, create, like, endorphins, create good feelings, which is a way to train your body that it's safe. So things that feel good, things that feel good are good for completing the stress response cycle. Here's the catch, it's not like eating sugar and dissociating, or watching a movie and dissociating. So things like drinking, doing something that takes your mind off of things, those only create a break, but they don't complete the stress response cycle. So totally do things. Maybe you need to dissociate. That's like a real learned coping mechanism. That's real. That's a real thing in psychology. But just remember, it's going to come back. It's not just like doing some drugs, like getting a rush of serotonin. That doesn't do it, right? You're going to have a crash. So you need to, when you have a chance to deal with your feelings, when you're in a safe place to deal with your feelings, then you complete the stress response cycle. So she talks about body self-care, which I said goes hand in hand with affection, right? Because affection is two people doing body self-care, basically, and then your own body self-care, like taking a nice hot shower, taking a nice hot bath, like maybe giving yourself a massage. These are things that train your body to feel good. Another way to do that is through yoga. So yoga goes hand in hand with body self-care. I would also like to make a plug for my no effort yoga video. because that is a great way to complete the stress response cycle. I designed it to go hand in hand with this series. It is meant to be for people who like feel like they can't move, like everything's too hard. So it's designed. I did it when I wasn't feeling so good in the beginning of quarantine. I did it every day, and after I did it, I had some energy and I was able to get myself out of the house to go for a run, even when it felt like, ooh, going for a run is impossible right now. It starts off, you're just rolling around on the floor. It's
no effort yoga.
Which brings me to meditation. So yoga is physical meditation. There's a lot of breath work. So any form of meditation or mindfulness, any of the things I said before need to be done with some mindfulness for you to complete the cycle. Because you really need to feel that feeling of safety. You need to train yourself that you're safe. And I kind of knocked drugs before, but I don't want to knock like prescription medications, because for some people, depending on their background, their upbringing, their environment, their psychology, genetics, physiology, some people really, really benefit from going on antidepressants. That's real, because what do drugs do? They change the physiology to create different feelings in your body, to create more serotonin. And if you haven't experienced that most of your life or in a long time, drugs can help you retrain yourself. And depending on the person, you don't have to take drugs forever, but it's a way to literally like learn or relearn a new feeling. And I also like to throw in herbalism as, either an alternative or to medication. Obviously, if you're really depressed, you should be working with a doctor or a naturopath to treat that. And you shouldn't just take herbs to treat it blindly. But I like herbalism as a way to come back into your senses, especially with teas or with essences of herbs and plants, because that incorporates mindfulness by scent or by the tactile physicalness of drinking something hot. When you do that, lots of times, I'm not telling anything you probably haven't experienced, right? Like, you usually feel kind of calm when you drink a cup of tea and you watch like the steam rise from your tea. It's a way to really become mindful. If you ever smoked cigarettes as a way to cope with stress, I think drinking tea, I once upon a time smoked cigarettes, and drinking tea is a really similar way, right? Because you can watch the steam rise. Like when you're smoking a cigarette, you're like watching the smoke. It's really meditative. So yeah, cigarettes are not good for completing the stress cycle. They're one of those things that puts a break. It's not the way to complete it. But working with your hands tactilely, like preparing teas or tinctures, that is a way to come back to your body and to be present. The last way that I want to talk about completing the stress response cycle is art. She said that any sort of art can be used. And from what I understand, it's a way of processing your emotions and letting your emotions out through your art. It's a way of processing what happened and completing something incomplete. So that is another way that people talk about completing the stress response cycle, self-expression. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because art therapy is, there's a mosquito. Art therapy is a field. I'm ready to close this series. I'm considering making a anger and stress series and an anxiety and stress series, because those are the other two stress responses. So if you're interested in me making those series, let me know. Comment below. write me a comment, leave some love. Thank you. I hope that this series helped you if you've been experiencing any of the things I'm talking about, and if you haven't been experiencing it, I hope that it made you smarter.